Wars are usually remembered through medals, monuments, and victory speeches. But in the 1960s, some filmmakers pointed their cameras in a different direction. They showed fear instead of glory, guilt instead of heroism, truth instead of comfort, and for that, their films were silenced. Governments banned them, broadcasters locked them away, screens went dark. Not because these movies were poorly made, but because they were too honest. They exposed torture, nuclear annihilation, broken soldiers, and moral collapse. They showed what war really does after the cheering stops. These were not just films, they were warnings, and that made them dangerous. Tonight, we uncover 6 war stories from the 1960s that authorities tried to erase. Movies and shows that crossed invisible lines and paid the price. Some were banned for decades, others were quietly edited into oblivion, yet their messages survived, waiting to be heard again. Because when cinema tells the truth about war, it doesn't just entertain, it threatens power. Commissar. A frozen road, soldiers march through mud and snow, their faces hardened by duty. Into this world arrives a female commissar, rigid, disciplined, loyal to the revolution. She is sent to a small Jewish household while waiting for her unit. What unfolds is not a battle, but a quiet collision between ideology and humanity. Inside the home, laughter exists, children play, life continues, fragile but real. The commissar, trained to suppress feeling, begins to change. She witnesses motherhood, fear, tenderness. War no longer feels abstract. This was the danger of Commissar. It did not glorify sacrifice, it humanized people the Soviet state preferred invisible. Jewish suffering, doubt, and emotional vulnerability filled the screen. Authorities reacted fast. The film was banned in 1967 and locked away for 20 years. The director was silenced. When it finally resurfaced during Glasnost, audiences were stunned. It wasn't anti-war propaganda. It was worse. It was honest. Commissar endures because it shows that the most threatening enemy to power is empathy. The Rat Patrol. Engines roar across the desert. Jeeps race through sandstorms. American soldiers outwit German forces in daring missions behind enemy lines. On the surface, the Rat Patrol looked like harmless war adventure television, but in Europe, especially West Germany, it carried danger. The wounds of World War II were still open. Seeing German soldiers portrayed as ruthless, defeated, or reckless felt like an attack on national identity. As a result, episodes were delayed, edited, or pulled entirely from broadcast. Officials feared the show would reopen shame and provoke unrest. What was entertainment in America became political dynamite elsewhere. The series itself wasn't radical, its suppression was. It revealed how even light war stories could become threats when history remained unresolved. Today, the Rat Patrol is mostly remembered as vintage television, but in the 1960s, it became part of a larger censorship story. Proof that sometimes it isn't the message that scares governments, but the memory it awakens. Higher Principle. A classroom sits in silence. Outside, Nazi boots echo through the streets. Inside, an elderly teacher speaks calmly to his students. His lesson is simple, yet deadly. You must not kill. Set during the German occupation, Higher Principle follows students accused of resistance after the assassination of a Nazi official. As executions loom, the teacher becomes their moral shield. There are no battles here, no gunfire, only words, dangerous words. The film exposes how obedience turns ordinary men into executioners. In post-war West Germany, this truth was too raw. Authorities banned the film for years, labeling it anti-German. But Higher Principle was never about nationality. It was about conscience. When laws demand cruelty, does morality demand defiance? When the film finally returned to screens, critics recognized its quiet courage. Today, it remains one of the most powerful reminders that resistance does not always shout. Sometimes it speaks softly, in a classroom, knowing the cost. Andrei Rublev. Smoke rises from burned villages. Bells ring across a wounded land. At the center of Andrei Rublev is not a warrior, but an artist, a painter struggling to create beauty in a world drowning in violence. Directed by Andrei Tarkovsky, the film travels through medieval Russia, where war, famine, and cruelty are constant shadows. Battles are rare, but suffering is everywhere. Tartar raids destroy towns, faith is tested, silence dominates. For the Soviet authorities, this was unacceptable. The film questioned progress, it embraced religion, it showed despair instead of optimism. Completed in 1966, it was shelved, cut, and censored. The full version would not be seen for years. When it finally resurfaced during Glasnost, audiences were stunned by its boldness. Andrei Rublev reminds us that creation itself is resistance. In times of destruction, choosing to make something beautiful becomes a revolutionary act. The glass harmonica. A silent city stands frozen under towering statues. A strange instrument begins to play. Its sound awakens emotion, imagination, freedom. People listen, they feel alive. Then authority arrives. Soldiers smash the harmonica. Silence returns. The glass harmonica is an animated film, but its message is deadly serious. Directed by Andrei Krozhansky, it uses surreal images to depict a war between creativity and control. There are no armies, no bombs. The battle is internal. Art versus obedience. For the Soviet censors, the meaning was clear. The film was banned almost immediately in 1968. Too symbolic, too dangerous. For years, it survived only as rumor. When it finally resurfaced decades later, audiences were stunned by its boldness. The glass harmonica reminds us that art frightens power because it cannot be controlled. Sometimes a single note is more threatening than an army. Paths of glory. Endless trenches stretch across the battlefield. Soldiers wait for orders they know will kill them. When the attack fails, 3 men are chosen to die, not for cowardice, but for convenience. Paths of Glory, directed by Stanley Kubrick, exposes the machinery of injustice behind military honor. Though released in 1957, its suppression defined the 1960s. France banned it for nearly 20 years. Spain hid it under dictatorship. Military institutions refused to screen it. The reason was simple. The film accused leadership, not soldiers. Generals are shown as arrogant and detached, sacrificing lives to protect reputation. Critics praised it as a masterpiece. Audiences whispered about it like forbidden truth. Today, it stands among the greatest anti-war films ever made. Paths of Glory endures because it dares to say what governments fear most, that the true enemy in war may not be across the battlefield, but sitting safely behind a desk. Combat. Mud-soaked fields stretch across Europe as a small American unit moves cautiously through enemy territory. In combat, war is not about victory or heroism. It is about fear, hesitation, and survival. Each episode follows soldiers forced to make impossible choices under constant threat. Friends die suddenly. Orders feel unclear. Courage often looks like exhaustion. This realism made the series stand apart from other war shows of its time, but it also made it dangerous. In West Germany, where memories of World War II were still raw, officials restricted or delayed broadcasts. They feared how German soldiers were portrayed and how old wounds might reopen. What seemed like honest drama in the United States became political risk elsewhere. Combat avoided speeches and slogans. It showed war as confusion lived by ordinary men. Today, it is remembered as one of television's most truthful war portrayals. Its quiet censorship reminds us that realism itself can threaten nations still haunted by history. Le Petit Soldat. A young man waits in silence, caught between loyalty and love. Le Petit Soldat takes place during the Algerian War, but the battlefield is the human mind. Directed by Jean-Luc Godard, the film follows a reluctant spy who questions the violence he is ordered to support. Torture is shown calmly. Moral collapse unfolds quietly. This honesty terrified French authorities. Released in 1960, the film was immediately banned. The government feared it would inflame public anger during an already brutal conflict. Only after the war ended was it finally released in 1963. The ban transformed the film into forbidden cinema. Critics later praised its restraint and depth. It did not shout accusations, it observed consequences. Le Petit Soldat endures because it exposes how war poisons everything it touches, not just bodies, but love, trust, and conscience. It reminds us that silence can be louder than a gunfire. The Battle of Algiers. A bomb hidden in a handbag, a crowded cafe, a sudden explosion. The Battle of Algiers feels less like a film and more like a documentary pulled from history. Shot in stark black and white, it recreates Algeria's fight for independence with terrifying realism. Director Gillo Pontecorvo used non-actors and handheld cameras to blur truth and fiction. The film shows torture, reprisals, and civilian deaths without choosing heroes. That balance made it unbearable for the French government. It was banned for years, feared as revolutionary propaganda. Veterans protested, politicians worried it would inspire unrest. Ironically, militaries studied it, rebels embraced it. Critics called it a masterpiece. The Battle of Algiers became both art and weapon. Its power lies in honesty. It refuses comfort and exposes how violence feeds on itself. Governments feared it because it didn't explain war, it showed it. Thou shalt not kill. A prison replaces the battlefield. A single man refuses to carry a weapon. Thou shalt not kill follows a conscientious objector imprisoned during World War II for refusing to take a life. His resistance is quiet, but it shakes everyone around him. Guards mock him, officials pressure him, fellow prisoners question his sanity. There are no battles here, only moral endurance. The film asks a dangerous question. Is refusing to obey sometimes the bravest act? Released in 1961, it was quickly banned in France. Its pacifist message was considered subversive during a time of military tension and colonial conflict. When the film finally returned to screens, critics praised its courage. It offered no easy answers. Thou shalt not kill endures because it redefines heroism. It suggests that strength is not always found in fighting, but in refusing to become what war demands. Avoir vents en les arrêts. Young men are sent into the Algerian desert believing in ideals. What they find is confusion, fear, and moral collapse. Avoir vents en les arrêts follows French conscripts forced into a colonial war they barely understand. Discipline erodes, orders grow cruel, survival demands obedience. Though released in 1972, the film reflects years of censorship rooted in the 1960s. France long suppressed war films that showed conscripts as victims rather than heroes. Torture, rebellion, and disillusionment were considered too dangerous to portray. The film avoids spectacle. Violence feels ugly and pointless. Authority appears distant and cold. When audiences finally saw it, critics praised its honesty. Avoir vents en les arrêts stands as a reckoning. It reminds us that colonial wars do not create glory. They create lasting damage, carried home by those forced to fight them. The films we've uncovered tonight were never meant to be comfortable. They were meant to disturb, to question, to linger long after the screen went dark. That is why they were banned, delayed, and silenced. Not because they lied, but because they told the truth too clearly. In the 1960s, governments believed they could control memory by controlling images. They hid these films, hoping fear and conscience would fade with time. But truth doesn't disappear, it waits. And when these stories finally resurfaced, they carried even more weight. These films remind us that war is not just fought with weapons, but with narratives. Who is allowed to speak? What is allowed to be shown? And who decides what we remember? Cinema is more than entertainment. It is memory, and memory is dangerous. If you want to keep uncovering the films the world tried and failed to silence, subscribe, like, and stay with us. The next story is already waiting.